everyone, and welcome to No Off Season presented by Mass Mutual. I'm Zena.
I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And I'm Ben Pickman.
And today on the show, it's our big Dallas Wings preview pod. What will the transition to the WNBA be like for Paige Bueckers? And how will she fit in on the existing squad in Dallas? Not only that, but the Wings have a lot of fresh talent and coaches ready to hit the court. And how will it all impact their season ahead? We're going to get into it. And then Sabreena sits down with Wings GM Curt Miller. All right, guys, how you guys doing? You guys ready to go out to training camps this week?
It is hard to believe we are here, Zena. The WNBA season really is just like 3 weeks away from beginning.
It's very strange that I was just thinking that I have some time to kind of chill. And then no, Sunday, here we go.
Nope. And that's what I love about when Paige Bueckers got drafted. Ben, you did a story about that experience. You mentioned how she said, it happened a lot faster than I thought. And you talked about the feeling of Paige Bueckers not being rushed on the court, but feeling rushed on draft night. I feel like that is the truth for all the draftees, but particularly all players in the WNBA, feeling rushed to go right back into season, whether they're coming off of their overseas seasons, whether they're just getting drafted, whether they're coming off of Unrivaled. It is coming fast, but particularly for the Dallas Wings and their very big draft class. So before we dive in with everything that Dallas is facing this season, I want to do a little history lesson. I like a little historical context because that's important. And they were originally the Detroit Shock. A lot of people know that was a big time program. And then they became the Tulsa Shock. And I remember them kind of coming into my realm with Skylar Diggins-Smith being a part of the Tulsa Shock, and Liz Cambridge was part of the Tulsa Shock. That was when I first really got to know their team really well. And then they became the Dallas Wings in 2016. Since then, they've been to the playoffs 5 times, and they've only won 3 playoff games total. In the last 15 years, they've only had 2 winning seasons. This is despite having notable names like 2 of the ones I just mentioned, Skylar Diggins-Smith, Liz Cambridge, also Natasha Howard has been through their program. Satu Sabali, obviously recently leaving to go to Phoenix. Alicia Gray was in their program. Kayla Thornton. These are WNBA All-Stars. And also some of them WNBA champions. Yet the stats are what they are, and the program is where it is. So let's zoom out. How did the Wings get to this point, Ben?
It's a good question, and you kind of mapped it out, Zena. The Dallas Wings franchise is one of many, I guess, across the WNBA, but one of the highlights that has gone through a lot of change over the last 15 or 16 years. You mentioned it. They originated in Detroit as the Detroit Shock, where they won 3 WNBA championships. And after the 2009 season, with attendance numbers dipping, they moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, as you said, and Bill Cameron was kind of the operating chairman who moved the team, took over the team, and moved them from Detroit to Tulsa. And why that name is significant now is not only because he is still involved with the Dallas Wings, but he is also a part owner in the ownership group of the Oklahoma City Thunder, who, as you then later, I guess, as basketball history would have it, they moved from Seattle to Oklahoma. So you have kind of a time in which you have multiple Oklahoma-based franchises. But a couple years later, around 2016, the franchise moves from Tulsa to Dallas. And as that transition happens, the Dallas Wings bring in Greg Bibb. And Greg Bibb is an important figure in the Dallas Wings franchise's history. He is now the president and CEO of the franchise, but he has also been the general manager of the franchise for these past couple years. And so Greg Bibb kind of heading, I guess, up until this year, this past offseason, has been one of the, the key basketball decision maker with this franchise. And so, when we think about the transitions that the team is undergoing, Greg is now, very much still involved with the team, and he's still very much connected to the business operations. And kind of generally, he's still the president and CEO, as I said. But when they made their head coach change last fall, letting go of Latricia Trammell, Greg also said that they were going to hire a general manager. And that is what they did. And they brought in Curt Miller. And so, that is all kind of key context to this change. It's reshuffling at the very top of the basketball operations side. They've brought in more basketball ops kind of support. Jasmine Thomas got promoted. Their assistant general manager, Travis Charles, got a title promotion as well. And I said Curt Miller. So there's like a lot that gets you to this point where they have the number 1 pick, where they have Paige Bueckers coming in. Again, a franchise that has gone through a lot of transitions and is looking kind of for stability and to build a strong foundation as they begin this new era.
I feel as if this happens a lot on the WNBA side where people are playing multiple roles in executive functions. And when you separate it and you delegate, sometimes better things happen. We're going to see that across the league. I won't call out specific teams, but there's going to be a lot more people being able to do their jobs and being able to focus on their particular job. And I think this is going to be great that Curt Miller, who has experience as a coach and an exec within the WNBA, very familiar with the landscape right now gets to be in a position where he can position particular players, particular coaches, et cetera, for success, hopefully for at least the Dallas Wings. So first big move, obviously, number 1 draft pick, Paige Bueckers. And she's coming into a newly revamped roster, coaching staff, front office, as you laid out. And it's fair to say there is some excitement in the air. In her press conference, she was asked, like, how does it feel to be the hottest thing in Dallas right now, especially with Luka-sized being out? She was like, the weather might be a little bit hotter. It's definitely not the same as in Connecticut, which I appreciate it. She's so cool. Like, that's such a great response. Anyways, it's fair to say it's a lot of excitement. But with Paige coming in, Sabreena, how do you think she's going to fit into this roster?
Yeah, it's a little hard to say because, as you mentioned, there is a ton of roster turnover on this particular team. There are 3 returning players from last season, and admittedly, you go 9-31. You don't need to bring the whole band back, right? Something has probably gone wrong, and you can stand to make some changes. But we don't have a ton of information about how these players work together, right? So presumably, you've got Paige Bueckers playing alongside Arike Gumbawale, DiJonai Carrington, Ty Harris in the backcourt, how Chris Koklanis chooses to mix and match those, alongside with the other rookie, Isaiah James, how, like, maybe JJ Quinterly or, other training camp players like Kyla Charles fit into this is still up for discussion. But I think those 4 are probably going to be your base backcourt. And I truthfully like Paige's combination with all of them, right? Like, Ty Harris, awesome shooter, kind of reminds me of a little Easy Fudd type, right? Some 3-and-D. DiJonai Carrington, someone who can probably take on more of the primary defensive matchups at point guard, allowing Paige to really focus on the offensive end, play a more helper role on defense, which is where she really excelled at UConn. You put her next to Arike, and then we get into real facilitator mode for Paige, right? Because there's somebody who can get buckets as well as anybody else in the WNBA. So I think there are a lot of interesting combinations for how she can play off of, those backcourt players, the front court. I think we mentioned on our last episode with the intriguing players. I have a few more questions about, right? There's still some hurdles to be cleared in terms of making those decisions. But I really like the way that she can play alongside all of these players that Dallas has either acquired or, retained in the case of Arike this offseason in that backcourt rotation.
I love that. Thank you for breaking that down. I'm very curious, especially because not only do we not know a ton about what these players look like together, we don't know how Chris Koklanis is going to use them together. We don't know what he's, good at in terms of creating offensively. Ben, when it comes to his role at USC and what he was known for and what he was appreciated for, how do you think he's going to be able to help Paige's game and her transition into the W?
Yeah, I mean, Chris has long been a name to watch in the WNBA coaching ranks. A few years ago, when Sabreena and I did kind of a GM survey at the end of the 2023 season, he was one of the 2 names that we heard most often from executives when we were asked about, coaches who had not yet been a head coach in the WNBA, but would make a great hire for any franchise. And Curt Miller, they worked together at the Connecticut Sun for a long time before Chris ended up taking the USC job. Curt would give Chris a lot of latitude to draw plays at the end of huddles. He became like the defensive coordinator in Connecticut as well. Like, he played a big role for the Connecticut Sun during his tenure. And Sabreena knows this from being around USC. Like, he was super well liked and well regarded as a basketball mind and as a coach with the Trojans too. And, he came on this podcast, Zena, I guess a few months back once he was hired. And he talked about, like, that was also a really formative experience for him because he got the opportunity to learn from Lindsay Gottlieb, who is another really, really good basketball mind, has NBA experience, has a lot of collegiate experience. Like, again, kind of allowed him to, I don't know, just like get different pieces of information from different coaches.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been thinking about, though, as they are kind of having Paige Bueckers transition, and this goes back to one of the things actually Greg Bibb told me on draft night, was, as the number one pick, you control the board, obviously, right? You control the rest of the draft because you have that first selection. And that is especially beneficial in this WNBA context when there is a quick transition, because in theory, and the Dallas Wings have said they've kind of settled on Paige Bueckers a long, long time ago after winning the lottery, they have had months and months and months to prepare for how she is going to fit in and to think about it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Chris Koklanis and his staff and Curt Miller and his staff, they've been, in theory, they could be running through film as much as they want, knowing that this was going to be the selection. Whereas if you're even taking, a player 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever, you might only have 3.5 weeks to think about how that player is going to acclimate to the roster you already have. So when we think about transition, like, that is another benefit. Not only are you getting a great player, but you have prepared, in theory, 4 months for this great player to be part of your roster.
There you go. And that's a really big factor, to be able to already be thinking about how Paige and Arike can kill it in the backcourt. I've been thinking about it since December. I know a lot of people have been, and I'm sure Dallas has been, or particularly Dallas has experienced a major basketball loss recently, of course, with Luka Doncic going to the Los Angeles Lakers, or being traded. I should not say that he went on his own. He was traded to Los Angeles Lakers. So there is a Luka-sized hole in Dallas basketball right now. And so, Sabreena, vibe check. Like, how's Dallas feeling? How is Paige's presence kind of remaking Dallas basketball?
Well, I was actually pleasantly surprised. A lot of my friends who are big Mavericks fans were aware of Paige getting drafted, like, who I didn't know really had women's basketball on their radar. And like, one of my buddies just had a baby girl last month, and we've already got a little Bueckers onesie for her. So, good things happening for some,
okay.
personal Dallas fans at least. But
I love that.
I think Ben has talked about this at length, just how Dallas is prepared from a business perspective, to capitalize on this addition of Paige Bueckers. And they made an announcement just the other day that their broadcast has expanded to the point where they're going to be reaching like 6.3 million households in markets, around Dallas, to be able to air their games locally, which is just a massive footprint when you have a star of Paige Bueckers' quality, right? Like, who can theoretically demand some attention. If you play attractive basketball, people are going to want to watch, and now they can watch, right? Like, that's always been an issue with the WNBA, is if the product is available, and so they're making it more available, which is fantastic. I really like what Ben said about just being able to prepare since November for this. Like, they were able to go through free agency knowing, like, these are the players we want to play next to Paige. And it's not so much like that they have the time to think about it. It's they could literally build their roster that way, right? Like, if you're, let's say, Golden State, right? Like, you couldn't build your roster around who was going to be available at number 5 because you just simply didn't know. So I think it's just a lot of preparation has gone to this point, right? And they've had, even though there's a lot of turnover, I think that there is a lot of intention, at least, into how we can build around Paige, how we can make sure that she is seen, that like her jersey was available for purchase on draft night in the Dallas Wings watch party. Just everything is being made accessible. And like, you can do that when you know that you have a product that is going to move, right?
Yeah, I thought it was so cool. There was a tweet literally the next morning of the WNBA draft. Some guy was in the gym with the Paige Bueckers jersey on. Someone was like, how the hell? This got to be counterfeit. Like, how the heck did you get this jersey already? It literally happened last night. It's crazy. I love that there's this energy. But the biggest thing I think everyone's kind of like on the edge of their seat about is, how is she going to be received in the ecosystem of the WNBA? We remember what the transition was like for big stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese into WNBA. It was a lot of good, a lot of bad, lots of conversations overall. What do you think Paige's transition to the WNBA is going to be like in the ecosphere? Ben, I'll start with you.
I mean, I think this goes back to Dallas having a lot of time to prepare. And this was actually a question that someone asked Curt Miller about a couple weeks back when he was one of the GMs on this call, where we were he was reflecting on what they might have learned from Caitlin Clark's experience as a high-profile guard entering the WNBA, and he said that they learned a lot. And he was unspecific about some things and specific about others, but some of the specific things that he did mention was like even from a security standpoint and like fan engagement standpoint, like that is a takeaway that they can apply to ensuring the safety and protection of their players, both physically and on digital and on the internet as well, as she transitions to the professional ranks. Like I think it's fair to say that she's going to have some kind of transition, to the pro ranks, like you would expect any player, like we were talking about last year for those high-profile rookies, right? Just because she's going from the college level to the pro level in a very short period of time without giving her body a ton of time to rest, recover, and adapt. But again, I think this goes back to the Wings spending a lot of time to prepare for this to happen. And that is especially important because when you consider, and Sabreena touched on this a little bit when she talked about the fit, like the Dallas Wings point guard position has been a rotating cast of players over the last couple years. Like I really have been stuck with, you mentioned that 2023 season, that was their most successful year in recent memory. Odyssey Sims did not start a single game for them during the regular season and started the final 2 games for them in the playoffs, right? Like Crystal Dangerfield had been their starting point guard for most of the year. She did not play a lot at the end of the postseason because of how the Las Vegas Aces were guarding her. Veronica Burton's role, changed throughout her tenure with the Dallas Wings. Like this is a spot that they've long tried to fill via draft and free agency. And now they have finally, put someone there who they hope will be there for a very long time, and they can prepare for that hole to be filled. So, are the Dallas Wings suddenly going to win 30 games this year? Like, I don't really think so. But if you listen to any of the people in their front office talk about this season, the word they use more than anything else is foundational, right? They hope for this to be a foundational year, and that's, a little different than transitional year, but I think it bakes in this acknowledgement that there's a lot of new with this franchise. So, I think there will be some growing pains, but I think they are prepared and acknowledge that that is going to happen as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it's one thing to get someone prepared from a basketball perspective and have them in the conversation and from a press and PR perspective from the Dallas Wings. But there's also one thing, Sabreena, to have the world kind of ready for her as a star, as a foundational star, as Ben said. And this is the thing is, I think that the WNBA, not necessarily the organization, but the league overall was not prepared for last year with Caitlin and Angel, with just how much the conversation grew and how big the discourse was. Do you think that they're more prepared this year for Paige to enter the space and potentially take over as a star?
I mean, part of it is, I think that Dallas Wings are already on national TV a lot, which is a good thing, to highlight Paige as much as possible. I think the experience of having gone through what they did with Caitlin and Angel and, Kathy Engelbert talked about this at the draft, a lot of the social media considerations they have about just monitoring what the players have to see online and like trying to monitor that behavior all goes into play when you're trying to protect someone like Paige, but also market her to as wide of an audience as possible. I think part of it is just like, because we've already gone through the Caitlin and Angel part of it, that there's going to be less of, do the players hate her? Like, is everyone out to get Paige?
Right.
Like, I don't think we're just going to see that same sort of bully narrative, like the older players don't like the younger players as we did, just because it's kind of worn out now. And like, I don't think it's going to, have the same sort of resonance. But I think something about Paige just feels a lot more familiar to me than like the Caitlin Angel experience, because like she does come from UConn, right? Like there's a long history of these players who have come like through the Huskies pipeline, and maybe that's a little reductive, but I don't know. Like it seems like we've kind of gone through Paige experience before, and obviously I'm not like diminishing her talent and saying that she's like not going to be special in her own right, but it does feel like something that the league is more prepared to like adjust to than the massive rivalry that like, Caitlin and Angel brought in last year.
It's true. I think that rivalry kind of caught people off by surprise. And there has been this kind of lead up to Paige. I mean, we've seen her at the ESPYs accepting awards, right? We've seen her, the saga of Paige already. And so that's why I felt like her winning the national championship and now being drafted felt like a culmination to her college career. And now the page is turning for her WNBA career. So Paige Bueckers is obviously not the only new face in Dallas this year. We've talked a little bit at length of just all the new faces that are joining her from her draft class and also the offseason acquisitions. We'll see what happens if those draftees also make it out of training camp. But this is Isaiah James we're talking about, Madison Scott, JJ Quinterly, and Aaronette Vonleh. But also repping Dallas, we mentioned some of their names, Dejanay Carrington, Ty Harris, Nalissa Smith, and Maisha Hines-Allen. We also mentioned they got a new coach and a new GM, and you're going to hear more from that GM with Curt Miller. Sabreena's got a conversation right after this break later in the episode. But these are a lot of changes, and it's going to influence the trajectory of the season for Dallas this year. But Ben, we got a little bit of insight from Sabreena earlier about how Paige can fit alongside these folks, but let's take it a step back and just look whole picture at this team. What do you think? What do you think the impacts of these additions are going to have on Dallas' season this year?
Yeah, again, they're just trying to change the culture with this franchise. And Chris Koklanis said at the end of his press conference, his introductory press conference with, I guess, Paige Bueckers, I guess it's the rookies' introductory press conference, rather, Zena, that success would be, at the end of the season, how many players said they had a really positive experience in Dallas and wanted to return for future years. And we know the kind of general context of this year is that pretty much every veteran around the league is a free agent. And so some of those players that you mentioned will have the opportunity to sign elsewhere as soon as next January. So again, like, this is all about fit. It's all about trying to be, level up as an organization. Sabreena mentioned some of the business transitions and business changes. Like, this is a Dallas Wings franchise that is set to move to a new arena in downtown Dallas from Arlington, where they currently play at the start of next year. They'll have a new practice facility at that time. Like, they're trying to invest more in player experience as a result. I said, they've added, they've staffed up in terms of assistant general managers, and Greg Bibb has really touted the brain trust and experience of that group. Like, this is a team that wants to invest and wants to establish itself as a perennial power in the WNBA. And, they should be probably looking to the Indiana Fever as a little bit of a roadmap here, where a few years ago, you would survey players around the league, and the Indiana Fever were one of the franchises that were routinely the lowest graded in terms of player experience, or that players least wanted to play for. And now that clearly has changed after a busy offseason. Again, the Fever are affiliated with an NBA franchise, so it's not exactly an A-to-A comparison, but Dallas is certainly hoping to replicate it, no matter how well they do this year.
It's a really great point. It's not just the impact on the court in terms of potentially, garnering more wins for Dallas, but specifically thinking about the CBA being in play, and that a lot of these players, almost like 90% of the league are going to be, or maybe more, are going to be free agents next year. You want to create a space in which people want to land, because that is important. Of course, the rookies will be there, but you want to make sure that other folks want to sign with this program. Now, Sabreena, we've talked pretty much at length about Paige making an impact, obviously. But what are some of the new players that are poised to make a big difference for Dallas? And which player do you think will have the greatest difference on Dallas's trajectory?
Yeah, I like that they've sort of brought people in with some local flavor. Dejanay Carrington and Nalissa Smith both played at Baylor. Ty Harris has played with the Wings before. Aaronette Vonleh, one of their draftees, is another Baylor draftee. So when it comes to trying to retain people, it helps if they have a little bit of an attachment to the place already.
Yeah.
But I keep coming back to Ty Harris. When I first saw her name included in the Alyssa Thomas trade to Phoenix, it was just like, I understand Alyssa Thomas wants out, but why are they getting rid of Ty Harris? She's like the kind of player that any team could benefit from, because she just does so many things well on a basketball court. And I think her value as a complementary player, when you have stars like Arike, what they hope Paige is going to turn into, somebody who doesn't need the ball in her hands, but shoots really well from the floor, can cover her assignment defensively. I think she's just going to be like this skeleton key that you can plug into so many different lineups, whether that's like at the 1, 2, or the 3. That
Yeah.
I think that was just a tremendous addition for Dallas to be able to get her in this whole 4-team trade, that sends
Yeah.
superstars across the country. And I'm really interested to see how she does in her second stint in Dallas. Because the first one, everyone's a little rough their first couple seasons in the league, but I think everyone understands her value as a role player in the WNBA now.
Yeah, I might put her as an honorable mention for most intriguing player for the episode that we just recently did. I think she's going to be, and she has been in every place she's been or been brought to, at least for Connecticut. It was kind of like she can be a factor of elevating your offense and elevating your defense and also just elevating the length of your bench. And that's huge and really important. Ben, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, you talk about defense. Like, this is a franchise that has not been in the top half of defensive rating since they moved to Dallas. So I would
Dang.
say we've talked a lot about the offensive end and how Paige Bueckers will fit offensively, but I think a lot of Dallas's success will be on the defensive end, and Dejanay Carrington obviously helps with that. And certainly
yeah.
Paige Bueckers' size and versatility also does too. So for as great as the offensive highlights might be, I think how successful Dallas is might depend on how successful their defense is in 2025.
I'm trying to see seatbelt clicks, Dejanay. I want some seatbelt clicks. Okay, buckle up. No, you're absolutely right. Both Sabreena and I had visceral reactions when you said that they had not been in the top half of the defense since 2015, 2016, excuse me.
That's
Wow,
tough.
that's tough, right? Dejanay landed in the perfect spot. She could definitely bring that, at least for the next season. You mentioned earlier about Chris Koukounis and particularly how he can help Paige Bueckers and transitioning to the WNBA and having had the time to watch film. But, in Connecticut, he was known for being a defense coach when he was in the WNBA. At USC, he was a player's coach. Players loved him. Like, that was like the sense that you got. And now he's got the opportunity now to be a head coach. And we all know that that's very different. It's one thing to be behind the scenes, behind your coach, and be able to have that relationship with players. But now you're the head coach. You got to delegate a little bit and you focus on certain things. What do you guys think Chris Koukounis' coaches, like his coaching philosophy, his style will be, and how will that work with the roster that they've got?
It's hard to say, right? Like, we haven't really seen him in this position. When we talked to him in January, I think, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, his only head coaching experience had been an AAU team in New Jersey. So not a lot of tape on the Chris Koukounis
Westchester,
experience.
Sabreena, Westchester, not New
Westchester,
Jersey.
I apologize. Yeah.
Represent. No, I'm joking.
So it's a bit of an unknown, and I think we have to be too careful to just assign too much of his philosophy to what Curt Miller has done over his coaching career because, as Chris said, like for so long in his life, it's been Curt and Chris, and like that's part of why he went to USC to sort of separate from that duo. But I think, just knowing the kind of relationships that he has with players, I think about the rest of his coaching staff, like Nola Henry, who's coming off of an unrivaled championship, right, where she did a phenomenal job with that Rose Basketball Club in Miami. They're just so good at empowering players to do what they do best. And I think you look at this roster and there's a lot of diverse skill sets. We haven't really talked much about like what Alyssa Smith can do after sort of an off year in Indiana, and Maisha Hines-Allen empowered in a bigger role theoretically here in Dallas. I don't think it's going to be him applying a system so much as realizing like this is the talent that we have and we need to figure out a way to maximize everything that goes about it. Because frankly, like you think about Dallas, you think about two posts, like throwing the ball inside, really post heavy. And frankly, that's how a lot of Curt Miller teams have functioned in the past. And I think there's probably going to be a necessary step away from that, both for Chris's sake to differentiate himself and for Dallas's sake, to sort of chart a new path forward.
Yeah, pound the ball inside, offensive rebounds. When I think
A lot of
Dallas, I
those.
think offensive, I think a lot of O boards. This is going to be fun. It's going to be great for all the teams across the league that have all these new coaching staffs, but it is particularly fun when you have a new rookie in the mix, you've got a really talented vet that's already there and established, and then you bring in all these other vets that have, as you mentioned, Sabreena, diverse skill sets. And the person behind all of this, GM Curt Miller. Ben, before we get to Sabreena's conversation, later on in the episode, but like, what are your thoughts on Curt Miller and how he's shaping this team, particularly this year, while they still have these players before the CBA and free agency starts next year?
I mean, he certainly was very excited to have the number one pick, and that is the kind of thing that he recognized back when they won the lottery was a transformational moment for the franchise. And, I think he has continued to be very excited for Paige Bueckers and the rest of this draft class. It certainly is the kind of thing that any first-year GM going to a new team would want. So look, that is an unbelievable starting point for them. And then, as you mentioned it, he makes this hire of Chris Koklanis. And the last thing I would say there, adding on everything we've already said, is like Chris has been in the WNBA, I want to say since 2016. He hasn't been a head coach since like that time, obviously. But if you look at coaches who have like longest tenured coaches, and I get that he spent a year at USC, like, it's Sandy Brondello's been in the league since then. And Cheryl Reeve has been in the league since then. And, there are some some coaches who were players then, Noelle Quinn, someone like Becky Hammond obviously has playing experience, but like few people understand the transition of the WNBA from that moment in time to this moment in time who are currently head coaches like Chris Koklanis. So yeah, he's moving over a seat, but he certainly has experience, and Sabreena talked about it, like, him and Curt both have built a lot of relationships with players over the years, a lot of relationships with agents, with other executives, and that certainly positions Dallas well going forward.
Sabreena, I'll shift it away from what Ben has already mentioned in terms of the investment they've put in to ensuring that the Dallas players get the materials and resources that they need, but thinking particularly about what the players can bring to this team. Paige is the first person that comes to mind. I could not watch a tournament without seeing her face in a commercial. Don't worry, I didn't mind it. But there was always something going on with when it came down to Paige's celebrity and the investment and the money and the potential partnerships that she could bring. What do you think is going to be stirred up in Dallas for this upcoming season in terms of the power of name that they have on their roster now?
Well, I would imagine their jersey patch deal probably gets a little bit more lucrative moving forward, right? If you can put
Right.
that company on a jersey that says Bueckers on it, that probably sells for a lot more than what it was last year. But Ben has already alluded to this, like the practice facility coming, the downtown arena. They've moved one of their games to the American Airlines Center, which is where the Dallas Mavericks play already during this upcoming season. The Mavericks have some tangential partnership with the Wings. I don't want to mischaracterize it, but like more opportunities to move to a bigger venue to play games seems like a good idea when you have a player as popular as Paige is going to be, presumably this season. And then just like the investment in the front office, right? Like it's still mind-boggling to me that we are probably 3 years removed from most teams in the WNBA having like one person running basketball operations and literally maybe a couple interns around. And now the front offices are just stacked, right? Like you think about when we were traveling for the WNBA finals and how many people in Liberty gear were there in Minnesota, like just dozens of people related to the staff. And that's what we're seeing in Dallas, right? Like you mentioned, delegation in the front office, all of these separation of roles, empowering people to do specific jobs rather than jack of all trades situation. We're seeing that on the performance staff too. It's just everything that you would expect a professional franchise to look like, right? Paige has sort of catalyzed that to happen for Dallas as well.
Sabreena mentioned the jersey partnerships, and I would just say, last year, and I talked to Rick Bibb about this last fall, like they had more partnerships last year, set merchandise records and added more partners, and partners who weren't just local, but national and international brands. And you have to imagine with someone who already is as high profile as Paige Bueckers, that's only set to continue. The Wings have sold out their season tickets for the past 2 seasons. This year, they did so well in advance of what they did last year.
It was within like 4 days of the lottery, right?
Yeah, exactly. Within days of winning the lottery, they sold out their tickets. Their total ticket revenue grew more than 40% from 2023 to 2024. They're projecting more than a 50% increase in total ticket revenue this season. Last year, again, on the ticketing front, like they had to change, they rebudgeted their ticket revenue 3 times as a reflection of the exploding interest. Like I got to imagine those projections, those numbers have gone up even more this year with some of the things I've just said. Like they're anticipating a sellout for that game on June 27th. That's a game against the Indiana Fever. Will be at American Airlines Center where the Dallas Mavericks play. Like, again, there is a lot pointing in the positive direction here. And we should say that around the league, last summer, the Dallas Wings, they sold 2 0.5% ownership stakes at a record $208 million valuation. That's a high point around the WNBA. So I got to imagine the franchise is even more valuable a year later, not only with, a new WNBA TV rights deal come into effect, again, more partnerships getting involved, but also a new franchise centerpiece who is as marketable and well-known and well-regarded as Paige Bueckers.
Well, you know what's really marketable? Winning. And that's what Dallas needs to do. And as much as we could talk about the money and the patches and all the other things, they got to win. The Dallas Wings have to change the course of their franchise by changing what's happening out on the court. So I got to ask, what kind of season are we looking at for the Wings? Got big names coming in, but what does that mean for the Wings in terms of being potential playoff contenders? Sabreena, let me know what you thinking.
Yeah, I mean, this is not super specific, but I sort of have 6 teams in the running for the final 4 playoff spots. I think there's like a top tier of 4 teams, then the next 6, and then a bottom 3. And I would put
Okay.
Dallas in that 6, So
Mhm.
I think
Okay.
making the playoffs would constitute a successful season, in addition to all
Okay.
the metrics that Chris, outlined about people wanting to re-sign in Dallas.
Now, before, Dallas's size was an advantage, and of course, being able to have scorers like Satu and Arike were advantages. What are some advantages you think that they have that would even put them in that 6 box that you got them in?
I think a lot of it's just the backcourt that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
I think, there's a reason Chris has been so highly regarded as a head coach. I think he's going to do a really good job of just designing a system that works with the players they have. Again, I realized Caitlin was sort of an anomaly in how quickly she assimilated to the WNBA game, but Paige never had the same volume of stats in college that Caitlin did, and I don't imagine she's going to have the same volume of stats in the WNBA, but she will be as efficient. And I think just that level of talent is such an incredible infusion to bring into this roster. Having to guard Paige and Arike just sounds freaking disastrous. It really does not seem like a lot of fun. And I don't know that a lot of teams have the perimeter personnel to take care of that. So I think just that backcourt is so powerful. I really like their head coaching change. And I think there's just a lot of good energy around the Wings, which hasn't really been the case in recent years. And I think positive energy matters a lot in these situations.
Hey, well, stick around. Up next is Sabreena's conversation with Dallas Wings GM Curt Miller.
All right, welcome back to No Offseason. I am now joined by the general manager of Dallas Wings, Curt Miller. Curt, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Sabreena.
Yeah, just to give our listeners a little bit of background on you, Curt, you are starting your 11th year in the WNBA, 2-time WNBA Coach of the Year, Executive of the Year back in 2017, and now entering your first season solely as a general manager. We're actually talking to you the day after you were able to introduce your 5 draftees at Dallas City Hall. Seemed like a fantastic environment. And my only regret is that you were not wearing a Stetson with the rest of your rookies.
I'm still waiting for my Stetson. They got one before I did, but it was a tremendous culmination of our draft class with all 5 of them arriving, and obviously the official welcome to Dallas and with the city manager and the mayor was a really special environment and a special day for us.
Yeah, I look forward to the day when you do get your hat and Chris, and we can turn California palm tree Curt into Dallas, Texas Curt Miller, right?
Yes.
So speaking of the draft, you just completed your first draft as general manager, and I know you've been through this process of the draft many times, but was there anything different about this process going through it as the GM and not as the head coach?
The collaboration, which is so important to me, was tremendous. And going through it this time with true assistant GMs, Brandy Poole kind of acted as my assistant GM for all those years in Connecticut when she was there, and the other coaches really helped me. But having a battery of Travis Charles and Jasmine Thomas, along with Chris as the representation of the coaching staff, there was just a real battery and a lot of collaboration. So that first and foremost was different. But then obviously when I was the dual hat, I got to make the final decision. And as the coach also was always picking, who I desired. So there was a lot of conversation. Chris and I, who were coworkers for a long time and view the game the same way, we are wired different in what our eye catches or maybe what Chris is looking for as part of his roster construction. So it was about him and how I could help get ingredients that he would love to work with and what kind of players. So there was constant conversation of, Chris, this is really, really important to hear strong opinions. And that was a part of our process consistently throughout the entire collegiate basketball season.
You had mentioned the story yesterday of how, you guys had mocked Isaiah James like several times and never really got her to number 12, despite how many times you tried. But just thinking back to that draft day, like, were there any other stories from the war room that really are going to stand out to you or stick in your memory for a long time?
Yeah, all of my years, a decade plus now, in the league, I have not been involved with the number one pick. And so even though it felt like Christmas morning and we knew what we were doing at 1, until that really happened and you were on the clock first and you got to submit Paige's name as the number one pick, that was really special and something that I'll always remember. And I'll always remember the draft lottery night. Things started off really shaky that day because my flight was canceled in LA. I was stuck in LA for the draft. I had been packing up, and so I didn't even have a TV. So I was like frantic on where I was going to go watch the draft. And as it played out, my assistant coach or former assistant coach scooped me up at the airport, take me back to his office. I didn't even know he was filming me. So that, everything that culminated in that, to the point of that number one pick when we actually got to do it, because we knew on that night when we won the draft lottery what that really was going to look like, months from then, but really, really special. But other stories in the draft room, always on pins and needles, and the mock drafts that we, did as a staff over and over. And I'm a person that reads other people's mock drafts. And one of the things that I kept noticing was Isaiah James was starting to disappear from the first round in a lot of mock drafts of people that I respect around the game of basketball. And so I reached out to her agent. I was like, is there a feeling that she's slipping in this draft? And they didn't think so. They didn't also think that she would get to 12. So when it happened, it was a huge piece of the story that add another player who can really go get a basket, and now someone that we could bring off the bench, to spark us with that second unit is something really exciting and a piece that we were really coveting and were fortunate to land. And then in draft night, I will tell you, as a GM, I had more draft day calls in the midst of the draft than I ever have as a GM. We were seconds away from saying yes to a trade that would have moved the 14th pick for us. And we elected at the last second to, as the draft was playing out, to keep picks and not make trades. But we had no less than 3 people, 3 other GMs and teams trying to acquire the 14th pick. And I think it shares the depth of the draft and how I've always said, we look back at the 21 draft and Dejanay Carrington, and if you redrafted that class, maybe she's the number one pick. I think you're going to look at second, maybe even third round picks in this team that maybe carve out an opening day roster spot for themselves. And when we look back at this draft in 4 years, are there some people that are drafted outside of the first round who really have made a mark for themselves in this draft class? And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case.
You kind of alluded to the battery of people that you had in Dallas all working on this draft process together. And I'm wondering, is it maybe part of the reason that there were more calls, in addition to the depth of the draft class, that there are just more people in the room who are capable of fielding these calls at any moment?
Yeah, no, and not that way. You should have seen me. I was getting my steps in, Sabreena. I was running in and out of the draft room into private areas where I could have some very serious conversations with GMs around the league. But I think it speaks in general to our league, the sophistication that goes into the draft, the more in-depth draft processes around the league is certainly, you can feel it, you can see it. There's more GMs. It was a dual hat for a long time. Now there's not only a head GM, most staffs around the league have an assistant GM. And like us in Dallas, we're not the only team with 2 assistant GMs in the league. So it's just getting more sophisticated.
So you obviously get the opportunity to draft Paige Bueckers number 1 your Christmas morning, probably even better than Christmas because you know exactly what's in the box, when you open it. But you spent a lot of time in Connecticut, and I'm wondering, do you remember the first time, I don't know if you were connected to the UConn program at all, you were able to watch her in practice or even play, and what sticks out from that?
Yeah, just the fact that she impacts winning. There's games. I went to 7 games in person this year of Connecticut and countless others you watch on TV. And she just impacts winning. She's a generational talent, but at some moments in the game, she needs to score. At other games, she's a facilitator and she gets everybody involved and she doesn't force. It's fun to watch her consistently through the years and watch her in games. And it's one game to another. She can impact games in so many different ways from one night to another. And I think that's what makes her special. Bottom line, she impacts winning.
Yeah, Gino has joked with us both on this podcast, and who knows, maybe he's being serious. But one of the great things about Paige is that you think you know a bunch of things about basketball, and she'll tell you everything that you don't know about basketball. But I'm wondering, just in your conversations with Gino Auriemma, Chris Daly, what were you able to sort of glean about Paige beyond just the basketball court?
Yeah, I think the thing that Gino shares, and he will share it in press conferences, is that you've got to live with her because she's so intelligent. You're going to live with some of the gambling that she does, he shared some stories that instead of locking and trailing or, attaching and chasing a great player off of a screen, she shoots a gap to go make a momentum changing steal in a game. And, sometimes it doesn't always work out. And you as a coach have to live with it because that she understands that she was calculating and what she was doing and she was thinking. So, his advice, for me to pass along to Chris is you're going to have to deal with some of the gambling that, she might break the game plan, but most of the time she's making a good decision. Chris and I both had that experience with Alyssa Thomas, an elite player that she just went and made some plays, maybe that weren't part of the game plan, and she just made winning plays when you needed it because she was such a student of the game and so smart. I get the same sense when talking to Gino that Paige is the same way.
You mentioned her impact on winning, and it's, she has a chance here to probably have an impact not dissimilar to what Caitlin Clark was able to do on the Indiana Fever last year. And I'm wondering, just having been in the league and if you've had an opportunity to connect with the Fever brain trust at all, just what were you able to learn about bringing in a superstar type player, who could really materially affect your franchise?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, Paige's journey and Paige's rookie season is her own. And Chris and his wonderful staff are going to put her in positions to be successful. But there's going to be certainly a learning curve for her and the physicality and the speed of the game, the rule changes, the terminology. So there's going to be compassion and empathy as that learning curve happens. The one thing when you talk about last season that Paige won't have the benefit that Caitlin did, and this isn't nothing against Caitlin, but we had an Olympic break last year. And so you got to see some players get to take a month deep breath. And those rookies that were coming off a grueling, season in the collegiate game got a break, got to reset and finish strong. This draft class, which includes Paige, is not going to have that luxury. We don't have a big break where they can almost catch a second wind and then push to the finish line on the second half of the season. So we have to watch this rookie class around the league about load management. It's just not our rookies. We're all going to be tuned into load management. We're all going to be tuned into as they get tired and worn down, especially these rookies that played long into their collegiate season.
So one thing I've noticed in your past seasons in the W and even dating back to Bowling Green, Indiana, you've talked about how so much of your career has been defined by being part of builds. And it's a word that I feel like I've heard you say just several times over the course of our, getting to know each other, Curt. It seems like this year with Dallas, the word of the year has been foundational. Like every time I hear you and Chris talk, it's about making sure that this is a foundational season for the Dallas Wings. I'm wondering, like, is there an intention behind that word? Like, what does foundational mean differently than, I guess, a build here?
Yeah, certainly, you start with ownership. You appreciate everything that's been going on. And Greg brings me in, and I immediately flip a roster, which he helped construct. And his support and his belief, never second guessing one time as that roster was flipped and we made big trades and we brought in new free agents and it was going to look different. Just the support that we have from the top, the synergy that Chris and I have from the GM bucket to the coaching bucket. There's coaches on his staff that coached under me. There's an assistant GM that played for Chris and I, so with Jasmine Thomas. So there's just a lot of synergy. So first and foremost, we hope to, kind of relay that onto our players and build culturally first and foremost. Chris will, build that from the locker room out. But the foundational year, when you hear Chris talk, what's a successful season looks like? Well, we want to win, and we're first and foremost, we want to win. But beyond the wins and losses, what we look at as foundational is, are we playing the game the right way? Are the pillars that are really important to Chris that will come out more publicly? Are we checking those boxes? Are we establishing it? And as he mentions, at the end of the year, when we get to exit interviews, did the players enjoy themselves? And do many of the players want to be re-signed? And is the style of play, is the way Dallas is playing and the word of mouth amongst the players in this really, really sisterhood league, is there momentum about Dallas and people wanting to join other players down here as we move into a state-of-the-art practice facility in 26 and then, a renovated arena and truly become Dallas's team? That foundation is so important that we create something that players want to be here. There's narratives out there early on that Dallas has lost some star players through the years. The narrative now and the momentum building really puts us on a trajectory to, change that, and that players will want to come to Dallas. And if that's really the momentum that we create out of the foundational year, it's a big, big success.
All right, I just have one last question for you. I'm curious if you've thought about where you're going to watch games from as a former head coach. What's going to be the most comfortable spot for you to experience this as a general manager and no longer a coach?
Sabreena, it's a really, really good question. And I've thought long and hard about this because there's days where I want to be really close. And then there's days where it's like, I have to be away from the officials. So, Chris will not yell like I did. So I don't need to make things worse and continue to yell at officials. What I would love to do is I'd love to be across from our team and watch our bench and watch our coaches work. But I'm going to roam. I appreciated some of my bosses through the years where they would roam back to the locker room. They would get so nervous and they would be waiting for me in the locker room or the coach's locker room. Or, I've got a seat and you will be surprised where and how far away I am from actually the court. At home for a lot of my games, and then there's some games where I'll be more closer to the action. But there's been some intent, and I won't surprisingly be on the courtside chairs as much as you might think I would be.
All right. There's been a lot of intent in everything that's gone into Dallas so far this season, and I would assume nothing less for this particular decision. So I look forward to seeing how that turns out, over the course of these 22 home games. And thanks so much for your time, Curt.
Thank you. Always great to visit with you, Sabreena.
Well, that is it for today. We will be back with our full WNBA preview of the Eastern and Western conferences next week. So get excited. If you're new here, hit that follow button wherever you're listening so you can stay up to date with us. And please come find us on YouTube. I promise you, we look so much better on video. Leave a comment wherever you're listening. We read them. And if you'd be so kind, give us a rating. It allows people to hear my voice in their ears more often. So it also helps new people find my voice into their ears. So definitely give us that rating. And don't forget, as always, there's always more to read and watch over at our partner, the Yahoo Sports Hub. So check it out at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. On behalf of The Athletic, I'm Zena Cada. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to No Off Season. To hear more, be sure to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Tuesday and Friday.